So what decks have you been playing for the first week of the Year of the Raven? Personally, I've been playing Elemental Shaman and Taunt Druid. Here are my deck lists if you're curious. Frankly, I only built the Taunt Druid because I had a spare Hadronox sitting in my collection, but it still managed to beat my win rate with Shaman hands down. Greetings, and welcome to Hearthstone Theory, where over-analysis and concise explanation meet. Many days ago, about 7 to be exact, the Witchwood expansion was released to the public. That opening was amazing to behold, with the Hearthstone players experimenting with new decks that they constructed all by themselves. Then, 5 minutes passed and everyone built a one-turn kill Shudderwock deck. While I am joking around, the Hearthstone meta is very much one that anchors itself to very particular deck archetypes and then doesn't deviate from them once they're set. While the current Witchwood meta is certainly going to shift a little more, some of the strongest decks and deck themes have been set in and will not be exiting. So today we'll be looking at how these decks came about, what cards fueled their ascent, and what can we expect going forward. Here's the short answer.
Honestly, I'd say you only have, I don't know, 5 minutes. Is it 5? Yes, 5. 5 minutes before this planet explodes, and you perish along with it.
Oh, well then I'll just have to kill you in 4.
Let's begin. Last week I made the bold claim that Witchwood Grizzly would serve as a powerful counter to aggressive decks, effectively making them irrelevant. After recording that video, Paladin players pulled me aside and said, "Listen, Penniless, Witchwood Grizzly can't do anything against the Sunkeeper, King of Tempo." Okay, I responded, but you also don't have any other aggressive cards to help you out. Then Baku and Genn came out of the bushes and beat me senseless. The moral of the story is, if you ever think aggressive decks are going away, you're wrong. It's worth noting that the number of aggressive cards that Witchwood brought into the game is very limited. For example, Odd Paladin, a deck focused around the card Baku the Moon Eater, currently runs one card from the Witchwood, Baku the Moon Eater. That's it. This deck sometimes runs Raid Leader and Stormwind Champion, 2 cards from the basic set, and yet it can't find a place for other Witchwood cards. This goes to show how the Witchwood added a very small number of aggressive cards, which would be amazing if it weren't for the 2 legendary exceptions. To be fair, Baku and Genn seemed like they would be interesting options for both aggressive decks and control decks, and everything in between. However, the goal of a tempo deck is to maximize the rate of mana and card spending, which Baku and Genn appear to subvert, but in reality strengthen. Hero Power, 2-drop, Hero Power and 2-drop, 4-drop. 1-drop, Hero Power, 3-drop, Hero Power and 2 1-drops, 5-drop. The rate of card spending remains consistent while the curve is filled out, and while Baku offers less flexibility, she makes up for it by working more strongly with aggressive options such as 1-drops. While control decks can also take advantage of this, they simultaneously care less about playing all of their mana on a given turn and care more about keeping strong cards. So the 2 cards upside gives them less, while their limitations take away more. So while Baku and Genn might someday be viable for more controlling decks, the current state of their power leaves them to fit much more snugly in faster decks. It's this aggressive focus on tempo that has allowed Paladin to thrive in the Witchwood meta. Though in fairness, certain synergies and powerful cards from Kobolds and Catacombs have assisted these decks' rises as well. When examining all of the hero powers in Hearthstone, the ones that offer tempo are Shaman and Paladin, and let's just say Shaman doesn't count. It's this focus on tempo that allows even an Odd Paladin to become powerhouses, either playing their curve smoothly or having a reliable fallback plan for if the deck starts to get controlled. This tempo boost enables Paladin to benefit the most from Genn and Baku, which is why these cards are most prevalent and powerful in that class. So our mismatched misfits have turned our beloved Paladins, once bastions of control and power, into tempo terrors that traumatize other players that just want to make a good Dragon Hunter deck. But Blizzard doesn't just print aggressive cards, they also create cards designed to control opponents and win games through slower means. Surely cards such as that exist as well. In fact, they do, but frankly they appear to be causing more problems than they are solving. Perhaps the leading thought that people had about the Witchwood meta is, Shudderwock OP please nerf. However, examining the statistics, decks that use the Shudderwock one-turn kill are faring exceptionally poorly, so why is there an outcry? Decks such as the Shudderwock Shaman are a special breed of combination deck that focuses on making one card as strong as possible, similar to Exodia Mage. These decks are typically frustrating, but also typically require too much to effectively play. This is why Shudderwock Shaman isn't as effective at the moment. Shaman simply doesn't have the control pieces to be able to last long enough for the combo. That being said, this could easily change in a later expansion, so be sure to keep a wary eye on this card. So Shudderwock combos aren't working, but which ones are? To answer that, I'm going to talk about 2 different combo effects that are considerably more successful and approximately as annoying. Let's start with, you guessed it, Cubelock. While everyone likes to point fingers at this deck and declare it a scourge on all of Hearthstone, each of the individual cards in the deck fails to impress by itself, with the exception of Doomguard and Zoo decks. The strength of this deck comes when its pieces interact and synergize, sometimes in catastrophic ways. For example, on turn 6 it's possible for a Doomguard to be summoned, killed, and cloned, dealing 15 damage to the opposing hero. No control deck would reasonably be expected to survive that, and the few that can would then deal with it all again when the Death Knight is played. Of course, this deck has weaknesses, in that it requires the combinations to be able to be played effectively. As such, it runs cards like Defile, Hellfire, and Lord Godfrey to stay safe against faster decks. This leaves the deck with one final weakness: tempo. Raw, unadulterated tempo in the form of Spiteful Druid. Spiteful Summoner and Grand Archivist represent another form of synergy. To put simply, in the correct deck they are very strong, and in other decks they are quite weak. Unlike Cubelock, you are not required to collect the correct combination to get value. You simply play the card and move on. Blizzard printed many cards that benefit from this type of synergy with the release of Kobolds and Catacombs. Call to Arms, Ardell, and Dragon's Fury to name a few, and of course, Spiteful Summoner. I could go over the details of this type of synergy, and how it can be constructive or deconstructive for a game, but that's a story for another week. To simplify, Spiteful Summoner provides a disproportionate amount of tempo in a deck that can afford high-cost spells. This gives the potential for incredibly powerful tempo decks to exist, a potential that has not been squandered. Tying this all together, we have a meta where experimental decks quite often suffer. Aggressive Baku and Genn decks compete with Spiteful decks to try and quickly destroy each other, and any combo decks that survive instantly obliterate their opponents. There's little room for Hagatha, Rush, the Echo cards, or older cards like Linessa to find a home. Like I said in my opening skit, the game will be over in 5 minutes, so you need to beat them in 4. After all this talk about tempo and combo ruling the meta, you must all believe that I despise Blizzard, and I think them all foolish and ridiculous for forcing these cards upon us. To that I say, no. Not in the slightest. I'm actually really proud and really happy with how this expansion is going. When I started writing this script, I was skeptical of the meta, but then the oddest thing happened. I went up with my Taunt Druid against a Control Priest. While I played several copies of Hadronox, he managed to control my board, and even played Alexstrasza to almost turn the game around. It was old school, a lot like the first deck I made in Hearthstone. I was baffled. Control Priest? How did that deck manage to survive? But then I looked up the stats, and not only was it surviving, it was thriving. Positive win rates against both Paladin and Warlock, though it does suffer against Druid. Upon looking further, I was even more surprised to see Quest Warrior was also relevant and common. I didn't understand how this could be possible, how any control deck could survive against decks like Cubelock, until I remembered Psychic Scream. That's when I realized it. Blizzard knew how powerful these decks would be, and they prepared for it. They made sure that each deck had the pieces it needed to manage against its opponents and keep a balanced meta. While it's still skewed towards tempo thanks to Spiteful Summoner and the even odd pairs, even those decks have their weaknesses, and Blizzard does its best to make sure that those weaknesses are open for other players to hit. In fact, just earlier today, Ben Brode pretty much said the same thing.
Players decide what decks and classes they want to play, and then depending on what the meta is and which classes and decks are good, then you should actually change what deck you're playing to target those classes, to be better against the field. That then changes the meta, because if everyone's playing those decks, then the best decks now are being targeted and aren't quite as good, and so we see this change in the meta over time. Also, there are things that players discover sometimes late in metas. We saw decks crop up late in cycles sometimes that were very good, that players weren't playing for months, that then someone discovered a cool combo or a weakness in the meta, and they started exploiting that and creating a new top-tier deck. So things change a lot.
I thought about this carefully, contemplating the different ways that Blizzard has kept the game from becoming unbalanced, from nerfing cards to refusing to nerf cards, to releasing certain deck archetypes. Earlier in this video I said, if you ever think aggressive decks are going away, you're wrong. Well, because of Blizzard, the inverse is also true. If you ever think control decks are going away, you're wrong. As someone trying to be a game analyst, I seek to recognize the truth about this game and how it works. But trying to recognize the whole truth about this game is a huge challenge for a guy working on his computer at home. So to help me on this task, I need to remember. Whatever we know about Hearthstone, Blizzard knows more. That being said, Blizzard, Snap Freeze is a terrible card, and you know you can't justify it. So our mismatched Mismatched misfits. Mismatched misfits. So our mismatched misfits have turned our beloved paladin